Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, this has been a very big week in the Chad Daybell trial. Okay, this week, one of the rebuttal witnesses. Okay, this is a co-worker of Garth Daybell, a co-worker at the fun house or the scary house where they work. Okay, who's basically contradicting Garth Daybell's testimony about the circumstances around his mother's death. Okay, as we know, Garth Daybell claims he came home a little after 1 a.m.
And then at some point you got home at about what time?
So I got home about 1 a.m. shortly after that.
And he just walked by his parents' room and heard his father snoring.
And then at some point, did you hear anything coming from your mother and father's bedroom?
As I passed their bedroom, I heard my father snoring.
And is it clear that it was your father snoring?
Yes,
Okay. You had no other indication of that your mother was snoring or making any noise?
I didn't hear anything of that sort.
And basically just went and watched YouTube for a couple hours.
As far as I knew, it was a normal night.
Okay. And then at some point, what did you do after you went into your bedroom?
I got on my computer and I watched YouTube for a few hours.
Okay, so the problem with this testimony is it kind of fits a little too well with Chad's version of what happened. Remember, Chad's not testifying, but before this became a big public story, Chad put out in one of his prepper blogs, okay, explaining how his wife died, right? And so that's kind of like a testimony of Chad. That didn't get into this trial, but it's out there, okay, where Chad basically explained in a blog that he was just sleeping peacefully and he just woke up and just found his wife with a smile on her face, at 6 a.m, and everything is, very peaceful, and Chad didn't do anything, right? And so I have a feeling that Garth kind of has to fit his version with what Chad has already published, because that would be if Garth were to say something different from what Chad published in the blog, then the blog could come in as impeachment evidence. Okay, the blog could come in then as impeachment evidence. So obviously the defense wants Garth to just testify exactly to what the blog said. I mean, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Otherwise, that blog would come into this trial. So I think the defense would rather have all these problems with contradictory witnesses than to have Garth say something that differs from Chad, and then that blog would then come in to impeach, right? So I think the defense would rather just have Garth just stick to a basic story and just stick to it and take all the risk of being found to be in perjury or whatever. This is just a safer story, all right? And this way, there's no contradiction with the blog. And so this is what Garth said on the stand before any rebuttal witnesses.
Do you recall talking to an individual named McKay Abegglen and telling him you found your mom dead in her bed and your dad gone?
I don't recall talking to him about that.
Okay, so this sounds like a coached answer. Okay, if I was a defense attorney, and I work in criminal defense, so when you hear answers like he's not denying what happened, and he's trying to be very technically responsive to the question, because the question is not, is this what happened? It is, do you recall, or have you ever talked to a person, or is there another person who can say that there's another story? And so his response is, I don't remember ever talking to him about that. Whenever you hear someone say, I don't remember, and they're not directly addressing the actual content of the other version, okay, that's a sign they've been heavily coached, okay? And I think the problem is whether Garth could be, on the hook for perjury or worse, okay? Because obviously, if we were to believe McKay's version.
Do you recall an occasion when he did share something with you about some family issues?
He told me it was the following weekend after his mom's passing. He talked about that.
What do you recall him telling you about that?
I remember he said that he found her when he got home from work, and he didn't know where his father was. And I don't remember if he said that she was in the bed or next to the bed, but she said she was kind of pale and her lips were blue.
And your understanding from what Garth told you was when he got home, he found his mother.
Yeah.
And at that time, her lips were blue and she was pale,
Yes.
and that he did not know where his father was.
Correct.
Then Garth is then an accessory to whatever happened to Tammy, right? So he could be on the hook for accessory to murder. It's not just that he perjured himself, okay? And so probably what the lawyers have said, and this is what lawyers will tell people, all right? If the only person who can give another story is MacKay Abegglen, right? If MacKay Abegglen is the only other person who can say, then it's just a he said, she said, all right? And any time in defense, when you just have a he said, she said, you're not going to get a conviction, right? So they probably think it's a safer bet for Garth. And this is the way the defense said. The defense attorney said, look, I don't care which of these is true, all right? It's not my business to know what's true. I'm just telling you, Garth, if you go ahead and you say something that's not consistent with your father here, and if you go and say something consistent with this MacKay Abegglen, all right, not only can you be on the hook for possibly perjuring yourself in some grand jury proceeding, but also they would tell Garth, you could be on the hook for accessory to murder, right? And so Garth is probably like, okay, what do I have to say? I'll say this, and they'll say, look, and you're not going to get charged with perjury because it's just a he said, she said. It's just your word against MacKay. Nobody else is going to add or subtract to who has a stronger version. So, the defense lawyer would say, look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but you just think about that and you let me know how you want to testify. So this would at least explain the motive and the justification for a person like Garth, who's a very devout Mormon. Garth looks like a really nice guy. He looks like a really honest guy. For a really honest, nice, believing Mormon guy like Garth to basically flat out lie in court. Okay. And there's another factor here too, is that the defense attorneys are very manipulative, and they probably told Garth, look, your dad's on the hook for the death penalty. Okay, come on. I mean, help this guy. Your dad's on the hook for the death penalty. And probably Garth feels like in all the calculation of, we're dealing with the Gentile justice system. This is not the way the Mormons would handle, this internally. This is just the justice system of the apostates and the Gentiles. And just kind of this idea that, I'm gonna help my dad not get the death penalty, basically. So I'm sure Garth doesn't really wanna lie, but I think he sees that, hey, shoot, I could end up myself getting charged as an accessory to my own mother's murder, and my dad's on the hook for the death penalty. So you know what? I'm just gonna play the game here because I'm in the Gentile court system anyway, and I guess that's how a believing Mormon could get away. But let's also note, this is very important, where Garth can, he makes every effort to tell the truth, okay, even when the defense presses him. Okay, so let's take a look at this part where the defense is pressing him to lie and Garth sticks to his version against his dad.
And then at that point, did he show you where he buried that raccoon?
He showed me that it was buried behind the silver shed.
Okay. Okay. Now, are we confusing the raccoons? You know that you buried some in the silver shed. Is there possibly that some were buried in the pet cemetery?
I think, or they were all buried behind the silver shed.
Okay.
Okay, here you can hear John Pryor. He is pressing the guy to lie. He's pressing him to change his testimony, right? Pressing him live on national, international live streaming. I mean, this is like an international case, and Pryor is just outright pushing him to say something he doesn't want to say, right? And you can tell that Garth, in his quiet little way, he's kind of tired. I think he's kind of tired of John Pryor, and he's kind of tired of being pressed to say things he doesn't want to say, right? He's already had to do this. He's already been checkmated because he could be an accessory to his mother's murder. So he had to tell one lie, but he doesn't like lying. And I think you can tell here, you can almost sense almost like a resentment where he's just kind of tired of being pressed, and he's not going to be pressed. Okay. And then here's another one where they try to trap him into this thing about the McDonald's quarter pounder not being healthy. And he just kind of goes along with it, but really you can tell he's not really into it.
Then did you get some food for you folks?
I did.
Who did you get food for?
So I bought food for me and my father and my mother.
Okay, do you recall what you got for your mother?
Her favorite meal was the quarter pounder with cheese.
A healthy meal.
Depends.
Okay, so now we see the difference between Garth and Emma. Whereas Emma was eager, she was super eager to put her mom down and to denigrate her and to really show a disdain for her mother. Garth, he's not so wholehearted about it. He's just kind of like, well, it depends. He doesn't want to gratify John Pryor because he probably doesn't like what John Pryor is doing. That's what I'm thinking. So what I'm really thinking here, the one thing I'm picking up, we're going to hear later, okay, later in the testimony, Garth really has agreed not to look at any real evidence about this case, right? Because he hasn't heard anything about, like, say, the text messages where Chad is talking about Tammy being close to death. Remember where Emma said she did hear from her father that Tammy might be close to death and she might have a death percentage. Okay. When asked about whether Tammy was categorized as a zombie, which basically, in the language of Visions of Glory, if you have to read Visions of Glory, but in that, more or less in the language of that, it's when someone has a very, like, there's not much light left in their soul. And basically they're just inhabited by basically just dark sort of like, I'm going to say darkness, or just so much sin that they're not even, it's almost like the old blood atonement from the old Mormonism, where you can get so dark that not even Jesus Christ can save you. And basically you can justify killing people like that. Right. So when they asked Garth about whether his mother was categorized as being possessed, he really seems to answer in a way that suggests that he's never heard about any of that stuff.
Are you aware of your mom having been designated as being possessed?
I had not heard that before.
Had you ever heard of J.J. Vallow being designated as being possessed?
I had not heard that.
What about Tylee Ryan?
I had not heard that.
So Garth has agreed to be really insulated, and not to know about anything. That probably means he's never heard the raccoon text, right? And so he's agreed not to know anything about this case to help his father, right? But you can tell that he really, unlike Emma, he's not really all the way like. Number one, he doesn't know that Tammy was maybe categorized as having a death percentage, and secondly, he doesn't really want to go along with all this, like putting his mother down.
And then you went to work at the haunted mill. Is that what that's called?
Yep. So so about 7-ish, I left, and she was sitting on the couch and said, "Have a fun time. We'll see you tomorrow. I'll let you sleep in."
And this is a really, really important part of the testimony, because here you can see how Garth, as he talks about his mom, you can hear they had that closeness. They had that kindness between each other. And Garth, as he relates this last conversation with his mom, he relates the kindness that she had towards him. Okay. So he's caught up in this kind of like almost diabolical chess game where he's now potentially on the hook for being an accessory to his mom's murder, right? And he's also agreed not to know anything about this case, right? I think it's amazing. You see, this is the checkmate of John Pryor. See, John Pryor, he's trying to press on Garth maybe to think of other places where raccoons could be buried, but Pryor cannot afford to show Garth the raccoon text to explain why it's so important that he testify in a different way, right? Because if he shows Garth the raccoon text, Garth is going to get other ideas about his dad, right? So even John Pryor, you can tell John Pryor is kind of limited in what he can do. And I think it's very telling that John Pryor doesn't feel comfortable letting Garth know the real evidence in this case, right? I think that's very important. And let's not forget that even Emma, who is even more supportive of her father, I think it's clear that Emma is way more supportive of her father. She was emphatic. She was emphatic in her testimony that she never read any of Chad's text messages, that she wasn't aware of any of Chad's text messages. So even Emma has been shielded, from really knowing the evidence in this case. So the way I interpret all of this, I think Garth got checkmated in this issue of what version of what happened to Tammy. Okay, I think he got checkmated there, because if he says anything that differs from Chad's blog, okay, now he's potentially on the hook, potentially for an accessory to a murder, right? So that's the only area I think where Garth has no choice. And also maybe Garth privately is a Mormon, maybe he doesn't believe in the death penalty, or maybe he doesn't want to support the Gentile justice system.
And then at early in the morning, at some point, you were awoken. Is that right?
Yes.
And how were you awoken?
I heard my dad saying, Garth, get up. I need help.
Okay.
And I got out of bed and ran over to help.
So his testimony is that he ran over to help, just like he's trying to help his dad right now by saying what he's supposed to say in this one area where he could be in trouble, right? And it's very interesting because he says, well, how are you? Pryor says, well, how are you awoken? And he goes, oh, I was awoken by my dad yelling for me, right? But then a few minutes later, when he's on cross-exam, he says something else. He can't hold it completely together. Very interesting.
What woke you up on the morning of October 19th of 2019?
I thought I heard a thump, and then I heard my dad say, Garth, come help.
Okay, so when he's talking to John Pryor, he says that he was awoken by his father yelling, calling out for him. But then when he's cross-examined, he gets a little leakage, a little something else comes out that he says he heard a thump first, right? Now, I don't really care which one is true. It's just that it's really hard to tell identical stories, right? It's very hard to tell identical stories unless you are coached to tell identical stories, right? That's just human nature, right?
Did you tell relatively the same story to both grand juries?
I told the identical story.
Okay, here John Pryor must be really, really frustrated because John Pryor says, did you tell relatively the same story? Because even John Pryor knows if he tells the identical story, that sounds coached, right? So John Pryor is trying to get him to say something that sounds good for his father, right? He says, did you tell relatively the same? And then I really think that Garth Daybell is tired of appeasing John Pryor and tired of feeding into what he thinks is kind of a sham BS defense, right? Because John Pryor gives him every opportunity to give a realistic answer, and Garth just says, no, I said identically the same story. So basically Garth is kind of admitting that I said what I had to say, and this is incredible. I mean, it's amazing how much leakage you get out of these children. And I think it just shows to me, that Garth is kind of tired of this, but he has to play the game to a certain point because I think he has some jeopardy in this. Okay. Now, the next question is, what is really the story here? Okay, let's go ahead and listen to MacKay Abegglen, just kind of not on the stand, but just he's being interviewed after his testimony, and let's just hear what he says in free form in his own words.
I went up to him and I gave him like my condolences and stuff, and was talking to him for a bit, and then he told me that he was the one that found his mom when he got home from work the previous weekend, and he said that he got home and he couldn't find his dad, and that his mom was either next to the bed or on the bed. I don't remember what he said, but she was pale and her lips were blue.
Okay, obviously this is a big deal. This is a major deal. Okay, and I still don't know if Garth is going to come back, if they're going to call him back, and if he's going to break down and tell the truth. I mean, it's so hard to know what's going to happen, but this is a big deal. Okay, so the question is, what really happened? Okay, what really happened? And I know there's a lot of people talking about what they think happened, and there's some really good ideas, probably better than my ideas. All right, but I'm just going to go step by step. Okay, there's two possibilities here. Okay. One possibility is that Garth was telling the whole absolute truth to a coworker, all right? And he was just telling the whole truth as he knew it and just being open. That's one possibility, okay? The other possibility is that maybe in the days following this incident, okay, maybe the family had gotten together, or maybe Garth by himself wanted to create a version of the story that had Chad a little removed from the scene. Okay, maybe Garth, being protective, had, let's say, a motive to maybe tell a little white lie as he told people about what happened, to sort of make it seem like Chad wasn't directly involved. Okay, I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud. Okay, the other possibility, all right, the other possibility is that Garth was telling the absolute truth. Okay, but I still have to say there are a couple of things about this version that even for me are just a little uncomfortable. Number one, he never mentioned the foam coming out of her mouth, right? That's interesting. He said her lips were blue, so he's focusing on a visual of her face, but he's not mentioning the foam. So I have to wonder that, if maybe when Garth was telling this, maybe he's giving a little bit of a sanitized version of what happened. Okay, maybe he wants to edit out the really unpleasant aspects of this. Okay, so that almost sounds like a very serene, very, very neat and tidy, kind of not very ugly version of what happened. All right. So I'm still concerned that maybe what McKay Abegglen got, from his coworker, maybe that was also a little bit of a sanitized version. I'm not really too sure. Okay. But the real issue is it on the table now? Okay. Is it on the table that Garth maybe knew and found, or found his mother dead hours before 911 was called? Okay, let's assume that 911 was called, let's say around 6 a.m. Let's just assume that, right? We're talking about going back to like after 1:30 in the morning, maybe 1:30, after 1 a.m. in the morning. That's way earlier than when 911 was called, right? So let's just go with that for a second. Okay, what does it mean that Garth would come home? Okay, and first of all, he would find the body without his father anywhere near. Okay, what could that possibly mean? Okay, first of all, I kind of doubt that this means that Chad was up in the cozy cone sleeping in a different room, or that Garth went up to the cozy cone and found his mother in the cozy cone. That sounds a little bit awkward. I mean, it could be true, but that's not really Occam's razor to me. Okay, if you guys know what Occam's razor is. Okay, I think what this suggests to me, the most obvious, let's say the more Occam's razor interpretation, is that maybe if Chad saw that Garth was coming in, was like pulling in, maybe Chad just out of pure immediate instinct, just pure immediate instinct, Chad just didn't want to be seen close to the body, right? Just pure avoidant immediate instinct, right? So that maybe Chad just kind of absented himself, made himself sort of not available, just so that if there was going to be any discovery, it would just look like a surprise and Chad wouldn't have anything to do with it. So that's my first impression, right? So I would think that Chad was just acting out of pure instinct. And then probably Chad couldn't have been away for too long. He couldn't have been away for like 15 or 20 minutes because Garth would have called 911 right away. So Chad, being very clever also, he probably just out of pure immediate reaction just got himself at a distance so that he wouldn't be associated in proximity with the body, right? So that Garth could find the body, and then Chad would show up right there, and Chad would say, "Oh, I was in the bathroom," something like that, or maybe Chad would say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I thought I heard a noise," or just some stupid excuse. Probably just said he was in the bathroom, or probably I don't know. Maybe he said, "Hey, I was up working in the cozy cone. What's going on?" Or whatever. He would come up with a clever excuse. But I think the more likely interpretation is that Chad just didn't want to be seen close to the body, right? That's my interpretation. But he was not far enough away that he would have any delay in getting to Garth, so that Garth would maybe do the wrong thing and call 911. That's kind of what I'm thinking, right? So that's sort of my immediate interpretation, right? And so then what would have happened afterward? Chad would have come and say, "What the hell's going on?" And then this is perfect because now it's on Garth's shoulders, right? Garth is the one that found the body, and Chad is like, "What the hell?" And so that sets immediately the impression for Garth. His first impression, first impression is always the most important. Garth is registering that Chad is like this innocent guy who's shocked, and Garth is the one that found the body, That's important. That's very important. Okay, so if this version is true, okay, and so if Chad just sort of put himself in the bathroom or just got himself, put himself in another room and let Garth discover the body, and then Chad comes up and acts surprised, Chad shows up, acts surprised, but does it very quickly before they can call 911, then what would be the motive to wait so many hours before calling 911 at 6 a.m? I mean, clearly, if this is the case, what they wanted to do was stage a normal night. Just like what Garth said. Garth said it was a normal night. I was watching YouTube. My parents were asleep, and he says it was a normal night. Okay, that would be the only motive. Would be to stage them having a normal night.
As far as I knew, it was a normal night.
Okay, so if this hypothesis is true, okay, if both Chad and his son Garth are trying to stage what is supposed to look like a normal night, that is accessory to a murder for Garth. Okay, he is admitting then that he is accessory to a murder. So that's very dangerous, all right? But it looks like they may have together decided to stage what would look like a normal night. And why would they do that? Okay, let's just try to think of the most sort of Occam's razor, the least conspiratorial interpretation. Okay, the most conservative interpretation. All right, I think probably maybe what happened is that Chad acts surprised. Garth is there, but Chad shows up right away so that they don't call 911. All right, and then Chad is like, "What the hell's going on? What are we going to do?" And then Garth is like, well, Garth probably wants to call 911. So Chad has to come up with a really cool explanation for why they shouldn't call 911. And I'm sure it had something to do with the optics. Okay. I'm sure that Chad said something to Garth like, "Hey, man, I look terrible. I'm up there working, writing in the office." He probably said something like, "Oh, I was up there writing in the office and I heard her coughing," or she complained about the coughing. And then it's going to say, "I'm going to look terrible because I did nothing about it." Right. So that makes me look like a terrible husband. I'm up there writing and I don't care about her. Like, we can't say that. Or maybe he'll say, "Hey," he'll admit to his son. Maybe his son kind of knew this. "Hey, I was sleeping up there. That looks terrible. That looks like we're having marital problems." Right. And I think other people have interpreted it like this too. I'm not the only one to interpret like this. Okay. But maybe he just said, "Garth, we can't afford to let this look like this is coming out of a situation where we're having marital problems. Okay. We can't afford that as a family, because this is going to look like a death that's occurring in the midst of a problematic marriage." Right. So Garth, I'm going to ask you, and this is for the whole family, let's just wait a few hours and let's just let this be discovered in a way that makes it look like we are having a normal night. Okay. In other words, where it looks like we're not having marital problems because they're going to look at me as the husband, right? Something like that. I'm sure Chad put it in more Mormon language. I'm sure in the Mormon language, they can be more euphemistic and more beautiful the way they say it. But basically, he was just trying to impress on Garth the idea that this can't look suspicious, because I look like a jerk. I look like a jerk because I'm up there writing in another room, and here's my wife dead. That just looks terrible. So let's just do the right thing. Let's just get her into bed, or she's already in bed. I'm going to sleep next to her. And in the morning, we'll do whatever we have to do, And so maybe when Garth hears the thud, because here's the thing, if Garth is really on YouTube until 3 a.m, right? Garth is not going to be waking up at 6 a.m, right? He's going to be dead asleep, right? So the only way for Garth to even be responsive to, like, say, someone yelling or a thud, Garth has to be pretty nervous. Okay, so Garth must be going to bed just waiting for something to happen in the morning, because Chad's going to go ahead and create the appearance of a scene. Okay, now what Chad is really doing, I think Chad is really waiting for the toxins to dissipate from her body. That's the real motive. Okay, if Chad was a really honest guy, he wouldn't care about the optics. He would just call 911, and the ambulance would be there at 1 a.m. But I think Chad wanted the toxins, probably cyanide, to dissipate from the body. Okay, he needed a few hours to get some dissipation of the toxins, right? So I think that's a real motive, but Garth is not going to know that. Okay, so Garth is going to think he's just protecting the family image, right? And I'm sure Chad did it very expertly, right? So that's kind of my interpretation. If we're going to go with the hypothesis of, if we're going to go with this hypothesis that they were staging the scene to look like a normal night. Okay, now I think there is another alternative, and if we're going to be honest, I think we have to consider all the alternatives, right? We should be open-minded, right? This may not be the more likely alternative, but we should still put every alternative on the table. The other alternative is that maybe Garth himself wanted to say something that wouldn't make himself look bad or make his family look bad when he told friends about the incident, right? And so maybe Garth would think, like, if Tammy really was discovered in the morning, okay, and if Garth really did walk past the room, okay, and all he heard was his father snoring, but did not hear his mother breathing, right? Because that's his testimony. He saw both forms in the bed, he says, right? This is his version, okay? And he only hears his father snoring, but he doesn't hear anything from his mother. Well, then in the morning, okay, when everything gets chaotic, right, and they find the mother dead, he's going to feel so guilty as a son that he only heard his father breathing, he didn't hear his mother breathing, and he's going to look back and feel so guilty that he watched YouTube for 2 hours and then he just slept like nothing was happening. He's going to feel so guilty. He may not want to really admit that when he tells friends. I'm just being creative, this is probably not the likely interpretation, but maybe that was his way of not sharing what he felt guilty about, where he, looking back on it, he saw evidence that his mother wasn't breathing when he walked by their room, and he's beating himself up over that. And so he can't let himself share that with his friends, right? Because what would it sound like to tell his friend, you know what, I hate myself so much. I walked past the room and I didn't hear her breathing. I feel like a jerk, because I could have saved her at that time. Maybe she wasn't dead 100%. Maybe she was just not breathing, but maybe it was early enough that we could have got 911 and saved her. So maybe he just can't admit that. And so he has to come up with a version where he found her, okay, so that he doesn't sound like a jerk that would sleep all night and act like nothing and watch YouTube while his mom is dead, right? So that's possible. I mean, I'm just, we have to have every alternative on the table because we actually don't know what happened, okay? But I think the more likely interpretation is that Chad was right there, but Chad just put himself in another room. He just put himself in the bathroom to let Garth discover the body. And then Chad came right there and showed up before Garth had a chance to call 911. And then they went through the discussion of the family optics so that they would not create a situation where the public would get an impression that something was wrong in the house or that Chad was not being a good husband. So anyway, pretty much my interpretation, and thanks for your patience and thanks for watching.